Hi, this is Matt Regier with my Module 4 video, Understanding My Community. Some customs and traditions in the USD 206 Whitewater Remington community. First, this is a consolidated community, which is a major part of what goes on here. It's originally a settlement of some Mennonite farmers and also an oil town that eventually consolidated to form the Remington School District. The two towns are Potwin and Whitewater. And there are also several much smaller towns, Elbing and Brainerd and Furley, that have joined this consolidated school district. That does lead certainly to some traditions within each town. We have multiple fall festival celebrations. There's multiple pockets of communities within this larger school district. So that's one that I think off the top needs to be said about my community. Homecoming is a traditional event in Whitewater Remington. There's nothing specific that's done that makes it a custom or a tradition, but it is a big time when alumni come back. We see a lot of old friends, and so that's a pretty big deal. And the school is very centric, so the homecoming celebrations are a big part of that. After prom is a big part of our customs. We have some parents that every year put in a ton of effort and work to make sure that there are gifts to give our students during our after prom, that's a quality event, that they have somewhere to go, that's an exciting venue. So there's a lot of money put towards that and a lot of fundraising efforts that go towards that. We have a Fred Fest in Whitewater that's the biggest of the fall festivals. That's a community event, not just the public school community, but we've also got a homeschool group and a private school within our district that I'll talk more about later that all come together for the Fred Fest. There's a community worship service at the churches. So that's a big part of what makes our community unique. There's a Senior Citizens Day at the high school that includes some piano music and lunch. There's a market day at the elementary school that's really taken off in the last several years, and that is really their big fundraiser, but also a big part of what they can do in their town and their community. And then there's a strong link with local churches. I'm our high school athletic director, and Wednesday nights are reserved for church activities. We do not schedule events on Wednesday nights, even if it needs to be rescheduled. So there's a strong link there, and there's also a strong sense of custom and tradition that Wednesdays and Sundays are church days and church evenings, and those need to be kept sacred. There's also a community Bible school that meets in our schools during the summer, which I think is a bit unique, but that's been a mutually beneficial relationship. Some population characteristics of our district, some demographics just initially. The 93% have a high school diploma and 30% have a bachelor's degree or higher. These are from Butler County. I couldn't get statistics from our actual school district, but I think these are pretty representative of our school. 54% are male, 46% are female. Our community is generally a bedroom community. Each of these towns are very small with less than 1,000 people, so there's very few businesses in town. There's obviously a lot of ag. In small towns, that's fairly common. But we're also in close proximity to Wichita. That's a 20 to 30 minute drive depending on where you live. So most of our residents commute to Wichita or commute to Newton for their places of work. We're an 88% white community, and 39% are economically disadvantaged according to KSDE, which means that then 61% of our students are not economically disadvantaged. I was a bit surprised to see that that's actually under the state average. State average is a little bit higher than that. And then population by age, 6% are 0 to 5 years, 25% are 6 to 18, which are the students that we're serving in our schools. About 53% between 19 and 64, and 15.7% over 65. Communication channels. This has changed substantially in the last year or two. We've really increased our presence on social media, and that's been an intentional change. We've included a lot more on Facebook by giving each school building their own page and trying to fill some voids in communication with positive things. As our high school AD, I've started a Twitter account that's gained some followers and gained some traction for us. We also have an Instagram account through one of our broadcasting classes that makes some of the media that we send out on Facebook and Twitter. Parent communication, we use PowerSchool and the associated announcements there. We have a Swift Reach system that sends texts and email updates as announcements to different classes or different buildings. And then, like everybody else, we have email that is used to communicate with parents. We have a school website and a Google Calendar that's kept up to date. Most of our documents and more formal communication are included on the website. The budget, the school board minutes, physical sports documents, enrollment documents, all of that is housed on our school website. So that's an effective communication tool for us. And then we also have printed resources like a monthly community report that goes out. Again, with our district being one, geographically spread out, and two, kind of fragmented into multiple different groups, this community report is really the only piece of communication that reaches every stakeholder. It's mailed to every P.O. box and mailbox within our district, and so that's one way that we can communicate with everyone within our district consistently. That does lead to some challenges because they may not all get emails, they may not all get more up-to-date communications, but it is an effort that we make to try to keep everyone informed and not just those patrons that may have students within our district or are somehow other connected to the school. And then we also have some printed calendars. Sometimes that becomes a bit of a joke because calendars can certainly change, and they obviously have in the last couple years, but that is a way that we try to reach out to our older patrons especially. They may not have a Google Calendar, they may not have a smartphone, so those printed calendars are really invaluable, especially to some of our older grandparents or patrons that like to come support. Community groups, again, with a community that's so spread out and a little bit different, the community groups really are focused on the school in many ways. So there is a booster club. That's probably one of the bigger and more well-known community groups. That is a K-12 group for us, and it functions in lieu of a PTO or a PTA. Our booster club supports our elementary school just like it does our high school. It's not just a high school football group or a high school athletics group. They donate for elementary school STEM projects, or they may donate for a middle school library initiative. And I think that's a good quality of our booster club, and it helps them to gain some traction with parents earlier, and also to gain a little bit of more credibility within our community as a group that's not just focused on athletics, they're more academic as well. The local churches are strong community groups. There are many of them. We have a high percentage of our students that are involved in some form or fashion with those local churches. Just this last Sunday, I had a group of my basketball players that led worship at their church. One of them gave the sermon, another led the worship team. So that's a big part of our community and the groupings of our community. There's also strong parental support for these groups. Again, I mentioned that Sundays and Wednesdays are kind of sacred, and parents support that. They want their children to go to a youth group on a Wednesday night. They want their children going to church on a Sunday. And that's a huge part of our community and the values that are inherent here. We have a pretty strong 4-H program, and several, especially our agricultural families, are involved in that. And then we also have some private and homeschool groups that, again, almost function as pockets within our community. I'm amazed sometimes at how many people I may not know that live within the school district that I've served in for well over 10 years now. And that's not intentional, but our paths really don't cross very often. So there are some other groupings of people that function as a group within our community. The leadership of the USD 206 school district and the greater community at large really starts with the school board in many ways. I would say that they are the most well-known group within our district. Like most groups, it's composed of a variety of individuals. They've obviously been voted on by their peers, but they have a substantial amount of listening power, I guess I would say. That they are the people that community members will go to when they have issues, and sometimes those issues may not have all that much to do with the functioning of the school, but since the school is the dominant player in the community, they have a lot of power and a lot of leadership. The city councils of the 3 incorporated towns also are a portion of that leadership. They're somewhat limited because of the population and the business base. There's not a lot of sales tax increases or changes that they can make there, but there is some inherent leadership with those positions. And then there are business leaders that I would say are probably second or third on the totem pole of leadership. There's a fairly substantial bank in Whitewater, and the bank president has certainly some leadership in our community. There's a Kubota dealer that does a substantial amount of business in Wichita, people coming out to buy from him. Multiple pastors are great leaders within our community. And then there are respected farmers and agricultural workers that are wonderful leaders in our community in multiple ways, sometimes for the schools, sometimes for the churches, and sometimes just great leaders and people to be around, mentors to those around them. They may be crop scouts, they may be seed salesmen, they may be farmers, but these are people that are respected and their opinion matters within our community. Economic conditions. This is from the U.S. Census Bureau. 62% of men and 59% of our women are in the civilian labor force, and 8.5% of the residents are in poverty in the county. I thought that was interesting to compare that with the 38% of students that are economically disadvantaged. Those are from two different sources, and the 8% in poverty is within the county. But I thought those were, there was certainly some discrepancy there between those two statistics. The effect of COVID-19 for our community, it was fairly minimal. There was very little agricultural disruption other than crop prices, which were certainly affected, but the work went on. So we had few people that were out of a job necessarily. We do have a fairly large group that works in El Dorado in an oil refinery and in the associated wells in this area. There was a major effect there. There were some people that lost jobs or had a lot that was cut back. So there was some substantial effect there. And then we have many service workers outside of our district boundaries that were also either laid back or had their hours cut or certainly had their working conditions change with COVID-19. So like in most communities, this has been a relatively difficult time. I think we've probably weathered it better than most because of the substantial impact of agriculture on our community. The political structure, mayors and city councils in Whitewater, Potwin, and Elbing, those three incorporated towns, they are the biggest political players in terms of political power and taxation and that sort of thing. There's also township boards. The school boards, as I mentioned, also play a lot into the politics of the town and have a substantial amount of taxation purpose, but I don't know that they would necessarily consider themselves political figures. School administrators and influential staff certainly have a part to play here. They are not voted on, but they are certainly a part of the small town politics, if you will. That includes those agricultural players, that includes our business owners, and it includes the school administrators and the staff that have the ear of the community. They are a big part of how politics play out in a small town and a small group, and so I thought it was appropriate to include them there. Social tensions, the biggest one is a private Christian school that is within district boundaries. This is I would say an amicable relationship, but they are taxed by the public school. And so taxation sometimes becomes an issue. Enrollment also can become an issue because some of our students that are within our district boundaries attend another school. While that may be a little bit more common in a larger city, our high school has about 150 students. So having a private Christian school that maybe draws 20 to 50 of them is a pretty substantial issue and can sometimes lead to some animosity. I would say in general, that's pretty amicable, but there are times when that becomes more rife with tension. There are multiple churches with offshoots within our community, churches that have split over the course of the last century or so. Oftentimes those tensions don't arise until there is a point that leads to contention. It does happen. So those offshoots sometimes can lead to a moment of strife. The Kansas school redesign that our school undertook several years ago has led to a bit of tension. Like in most redesigns and compromises, not everyone got exactly what they wanted. So there were certainly some times, and still are some times, where people disagree with the route that was taken or with the final product. That's a point of tension. It's not necessarily something that has led us to change too many things outside of the community input that we have gotten as a whole. And we did. We asked for a tremendous amount of community input as we made those decisions, so that it was, one, defensible, and two, it was something that the vast majority of our community could be happy with. This is a very conservative community, so COVID-19 has led to some social tension, as in many groups, and also race relations over the past year to 5 years even have led to some moments of tension in schools, CRT, critical race theory, is something that has come up in school board elections. So there's some tension there as well. And then there's occasionally tension between towns, although that has decreased substantially over the last several years. Each town wants to keep their own school as much as they can possibly have that. Whether they can support it or not is sometimes in question. And just the quality of the building sometimes makes that difficult. Do you continue to limp along with a building that's maybe too old? Or do you propose building a new building on a different site or in a different town? So there is some tension and at times some competition between the different towns within the district. And I think that's natural for any consolidated group. So previous community efforts, I included a picture here of the result of our 2019 bond issue. I got to sit on that committee, so that was a good opportunity for me to learn some of the things that are in this slideshow. We completed a high school gymnasium, a weight room, a wrestling room, and a storm shelter. We did some classroom improvements at the high school, and then there were some small improvements to our other schools, some entryways and a tornado safe room in each building. That was a big community effort. It passed by a whopping 7 votes. So there was certainly some community tension there in some ways, but it was wonderful to get that passed, and we're really proud of our new facility. There was a 2019 Brienne Academy construction project also. So this is the Christian school within our district that at the same time was undergoing a construction project of their own that was fairly substantial. We also passed a bond issue in 2006 that built a new middle school to replace one that had been built in the 1920s. And then in recent years, we've had substantial improvements to our park facilities, including some major updates to our baseball and softball diamonds that have allowed our high school teams to play there. We've added a disc golf course and multiple pieces of park equipment. So our park facilities have really come into the 21st century a little bit from some of the maybe more traditional park equipment that you might think would be in the 50s, the long metal slide without any guardrails, giant swings, and that sort of thing. The power structure in our community, and I've kind of alluded to this, really centers, in my opinion, around our agricultural leaders. They are our school board leaders in many cases. They are the people that know everyone. They are the people in many cases that have access to the most funds. They're some of the more wealthy members of our community, and they're the people that you want on your side. I think there's those people in every district, and we've got some agricultural leaders that if I were to come in as a new administrator, if I were working for a new administrator, I would make sure that they got to meet these people and that they got to know them and that they found a way to like them and have them like the new administrator in return. We've got several church leaders that are not necessarily pastors, although many of them are, but some church leaders that are very active in their church bodies that play a big part in the power structure and again, small town politics and how that works out within our group. We have an ultra-conservative group, and I don't say that as a derogatory term, but we have a group that is very conservative and that has kind of fashioned themselves as watchdogs over our school board in some ways. They have made multiple efforts to make sure that the conservative values of our community remain intact. That includes a few teachers, and they've really been emboldened over the last several years by COVID and some of the mask mandates, by some of the race relations and the influence of critical race theory. Those have given that group certainly some hot button topics that they have been able to defend. So that also includes a few teachers, which can at times create a little bit of tension within our staff. But that is definitely a piece of the power structure and one that is, I think, in the back of the minds of our school board members. And then we have 2 or 3 school board members that are very influential and really help to lead and guide our school board effectively. They're the ones that I would say have the most power and the most respect in that group. They're probably not very mercurial, would be a good way to describe them. Very measured in their judgments, and they're wise school board members. Multicultural issues. It's a traditional German Mennonite community as a whole. That was the immigrants to this area. So European Christian holidays and traditions are pretty typical in our area. We have a growing Mexican immigrant community. So quinceañera celebrations and things of that sort. There's a rodeo that they host every summer. that's pretty substantial. So those are multicultural pieces that are starting to integrate themselves into our community more. Our school at this point has minimal acknowledgement of that. That's not something that is recognized very often within our school, and I think that's something that we could do better. We have hired one of these, the children of one of these Mexican immigrants as a teacher now, and I'm hopeful that that she can start to bring that more fully within our school body. And then public opinion. Generally, I think there's a positive public opinion of our school. We embody those strong conservative values of our community, and the questions generally revolve around the changes that we have made, whether that's with redesign or an advisory period. So generally, the questions that we get or the negative public opinion that might show up has to do with changes, and I think there's a sense of wanting to defend what we already have and what we've done in the past because it has worked. Our school, I think, has a good reputation with our community. We've graduated a ton of very successful professionals, but also agricultural, farmer, industry people. So the general opinion is our schooling has worked, so we may not need to change it. I think within our school staff, there's a feeling that some evolution is probably necessary and healthy. So there's some tension there at times that leads to some differing public opinions. I think we could improve community relations, and this is something that we're working on. I alluded to our increased social media presence. Consistent communication will help our district, and that's one way that we can help to influence that public opinion by putting out the great things that our kids are doing, whether it's successes on an athletic field or in a classroom or in a competition, a debate, music. All of those things are things that need to be communicated to our patrons so that they know what we're doing and they know what our children are achieving. I think this could also involve some community input meetings and opportunities for our patrons to express the things that maybe they're displeased with or the things that they think are going really well. In many cases, these may not be super well attended. They may not lead to enormous breakthroughs, but they might help an administrator to be aware of an issue that they were unaware of, at least from the public opinion standpoint. And they also give patrons just a voice, an opportunity to voice their concerns. And I think in many cases, this is true not just in terms of public opinion about a school, but it's important that we fill voids with positivity and positive communication and those input opportunities, because any void is probably going to be filled more with negativity than with positivity. My correlation statement: engaged families and communities are an integral part of the learning environment for students, and administrators must be aware of their surrounding community. The standard clearly outlines both the necessity of this awareness and its potential benefits as a support for school improvement and a way to strengthen student learning. Administrators who are aware of their broader communities are far more likely to experience success in leading their building, which is full of students who live in that broader community. My relevancy statement: community awareness is an absolute necessity for administrators, especially those in a new position. In order to successfully facilitate learning and teaching in a school, the principals must be aware of the strengths, weaknesses, and needs of the students that they work with. This can only be accomplished through an understanding of the community that they live in, as each group has its quirks and nuances, and the sooner an administrator understands those, the easier it will be to navigate those potential pitfalls in school improvement efforts. And then finally, my personal reflection: I work in the community I grew up in, so this assessment was one that I have already considered many times. I would be interested to know the awareness level of a newcomer to our district on several of these issues. My experience in this community leads me to believe that this awareness is extremely important, but also difficult to gain at times in some areas, such as the power structure. If I leave this area for an administrative job, these questions will be on my list for the interview, and early in my tenure as an administrator, to help me gain an early understanding of the community structure. And my references from KSDE and the U.S. Census Bureau. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it.